Hey, good morning. Today is another one of our first fives. Today we're looking at this unique text from 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And it's Paul writing about a church in Corinth, but he's also writing about a church that really doesn't have much. But what they do have is incredible generosity. You see, one of the things that we find all throughout the scriptures is that God always calls his people to generosity. Now, some people think we can only be generous if we have a lot to give. Now, if you have a lot to give, you definitely should be generous. But the reality for all of us is that generosity is less about the amount and more about our heart. I can't tell you the number of times I hear stories about people who like, well, I'll give to this if I have complete control over it. In other words, I'm not really generous. I just control things. I want to control my money. I want my money to be exactly what I want, or I want my time, or whatever it is. And at one level, I'm all for that. But the challenge for followers of Jesus is to commit to trusting him with everything. And so here's what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people, and they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves, first of all to the Lord, then by the will of God, also to us. Did you catch these two lines in here that I really want us to not miss? In the midst of a severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. So in the middle of difficult circumstances, instead of letting that be the thing that defined them, they were able to have overflowing joy and extreme generosity. And it welled up out of their poverty. And so it says, for I testify that they gave as much as they were able, even beyond their ability. Have you ever met someone who gave with such generosity that you were like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that? And I don't mean like just Warren Buffett or Bill Gates and this billionaire's pledge that they all have. They're going to give away most of their wealth. I don't mean that kind of generosity. I mean the person who you know doesn't have much, or the person that you know has a lot, but they just give so much, it's extreme beyond what we could ever imagine. Living a life of generosity, then when we live that way, our stuff doesn't define us. What we have is not what controls us. Instead, what we find is that God blesses us because the church in Corinth, they were able to give from a place of poverty, even beyond what they could have known, right? They were able to show this kind of life of graciousness and generosity that was radical. So what might happen if you and I lived a life of generosity like that? What might happen if you and I were people who were known for our generosity? What might happen if the church was known for generosity? See, this is, I think, the message for us that Paul wants us to get out of this, is if we will live a life of generosity, we will see God do things we never thought God would ever do among us and in us and through us. And I believe what we find when we're generous is that God blesses us beyond what we ever could have imagined. And that, for us, is good news. And that, for others, is good news. So I hope you and I will choose to live lives of generosity. Regardless of what we have, we'll be generous with all of it. We'll catch you next time for another First Five.